Hello, I'm Carl Maxwell. Let us imagine you are a lead designer on a video game project, and I'm one of your level designers. We're working on a game called Megaman X, and I come to you with a piece of a level asking for feedback or a green light. The level is pretty straightforward. It's just an area with some pits filled in with spikes. So you have to do a little platforming to jump over them. We've seen areas like this in other parts of the game. It's nothing fancy, but I think it'll fill in some space in the level. Side note, in Mega Man X, the player can move to the left or to the right. They can jump, they can shoot to either the left or right, they can wall slide, and they can wall slide jump to move up walls. You come back to me and say, it looks alright, but it needs some enemies. I have had this idea for an enemy sitting in my back pocket for a while. He's a little buzzing fly guy. He moves around in this completely random, spastic way, completely unpredictable. I add one of these enemies to the level, but then after thinking about it, I decide to add 3 more of them up above and also add in 3 platforms to block their path. My idea here is that you'll spend some time dealing with this lower enemy and trying to get past the spike pits, and if you take too long to do that, then the enemies up above will randomly end up coming down. It'll take them time because they'll randomly collide with the platforms and actually might end up not coming down at all. You'll see the enemies buzzing around up there and get worried and feel some time pressure to get through the area before they arrive. I submit it to you again, asking for feedback or a green light. So, I'd like to dig in a little bit and talk about enemy movement and level shape and how these things relate, and then we'll get back to this level. There's a lot of ways of thinking about enemy movement. If we look at Super Mario Bros., we can think about the player's critical path through the level and how if we add an enemy at just the right point, we can add smaller details onto that critical path. Let's think about an enemy in a top-down shooter who moves in a completely random fashion. What can a player do about this enemy? There's no way to predict where they're going to be, since it's completely random. There are certain patterns. For example, you can say that it doesn't seem to be moving very far, very fast, but ultimately you can't really say where it's going to go moment to moment. If we compare this enemy to an enemy who simply paces back and forth, we can see a lot of differences. The enemy who paces back and forth can be predicted quite easily. He can be dodged, he can be interacted with. This enemy adds things to the game that the random one does not. Let's consider an enemy that moves straight at the player. This enemy is predictable, you can form plans around what they're going to do. However, their motion, like that of the random moving enemy, is level agnostic. They're not accentuating the shapes of the level, they're just going to do what they're going to do regardless of which level they're on. They also add an immediacy to the interaction. The player has to deal with this enemy right away. They don't have time to stop and plan. In my game design terminology, the pacing enemy is an example of player-driven pacing. They give the player headspace to interpret the situation and decide what to do. There's no rush in this situation. When deciding whether a movement pattern works in a game, it's important to think about the other enemy movement patterns, to consider their differentness and layering. To see what I mean, let's look at the beginning of the Chill Penguin stage of Mega Man X. There are 3 enemy types here, each with their own movement and attack patterns. The first is this bunny, which hops in the direction of the player and periodically shoots. Then there's this lumberjack guy who lugs platforms at you. Then there are these wasps which drop bombs. The bombs are interesting because they aren't mines as I initially thought upon seeing them, but timed explosives, so you can safely walk over them without a care as long as you don't linger. After dropping 3 bombs, the wasps retreat. Each of these enemies is quite a lot more interesting than my spastic floating enemy. The bunny seems simple at first, it just follows you and shoots, but there's granularity to its patterns that might be missed in a cursory glance. Compare the bunny to our example. See how our example is just a constant movement? The bunny pauses periodically, then has an animation indicating it's about to jump, and each time it does, the jump of the arc is the same, so you get used to it and can more easily predict exactly what's about to happen. The lasers are a bit different. It seems to randomly choose either to shoot or jump when standing still. Also note that each time before firing, an animation clearly indicates when and in what direction it is going to shoot. An important point here is that the bunny clearly indicates what's about to happen, enabling you to predict what is about to happen, so you can make plans. Also, by having multiple states in its pattern, it gives you different opportunities and challenges at different points in time. Looking back at our simple chasing enemy, he now looks stale and uninteresting by comparison. Something else to note about the enemies in this chill penguin stage is that each of them is dramatically different. There's a hopping enemy, a stationary enemy, and a flying enemy. One enemy shoots lasers at you, another chucks platforms at you, the other drops timed explosives. They are different in size, shape, profile, they all have different states and clearly indicate what they're about to do before firing their respective projectiles. Also, the lumberjack will laugh at you when you make mistakes. Returning to our level, we can clearly see now that we need more stuff. We can replace our random floating enemy with a floating enemy that paces back and forth, providing opportunities to jump past them with proper timing. Maybe we could have it pause at the end of its pacing, and maybe after pausing at the top, it'll fire a projectile straight at the player before moving again. It's worth mentioning that some of the points I've made, for example, the idea that an enemy moving straight at the player is boring, have a lot of nuances to them I haven't clearly enumerated. For example, if we look at Dishonored, when an enemy detects you, they move straight towards you, then shoot or stab straight at you. This is still good design, as it isn't their default state. The UI clearly indicates when they're about to switch into a chasing state, and their chasing is not level agnostic. They don't chase you forever or through the entire level. In fact, much of the game is inaccessible to the regular guards. Once spotted by the guards, you just have to hide and wait for a moment for their alert level to go down, and they'll return back to a patrolling movement pattern. This is good because hiding requires awareness of the level's geometry. Also, Dishonored is good about giving you a chance to see guards before you have to move in, and this player-driven pacing provides an opportunity to plan before engaging. So in summary, enemies should have multiple movement states. Each state should have a clear deterministic movement pattern with clear indication when they're about to change into a state, and different enemies in the same area should have different movement states that complement each other. I'll try to dig into this more in the future, particularly I haven't really explained how movement states can be complementary, but this video is too long as it is. I realize this video is far from perfect, but hopefully you can see the direction I was trying to go in. And if this sort of content interests you, please like, share, and subscribe.